Aaron was convinced he had cracked the code. He did everything the financial experts tell you to do. He saved diligently, built a solid down payment, checked his credit score, compared lenders, and negotiated his rate. When he finally bought his first home, he felt like he had reached a major financial milestone. The house cost $400,000. He put $80,000 down. His mortgage payment looked close enough to what he had been paying in rent, and best of all, he was finally building equity instead of making a landlord rich. At least, that's what he thought. 5 years later, Aaron discovered something almost nobody talks about. The house he was so proud of owning was quietly one of the worst performing assets in his entire portfolio, and that $80,000 down payment he thought was working for him could have produced dramatically more wealth somewhere else. But Aaron wasn't even the worst case. His coworker Scott made a much bigger mistake. Scott believed one simple rule: renting is throwing money away. So when he qualified for a mortgage, he bought the biggest house the bank would approve. In his mind, a bigger house meant a bigger investment. Today, Scott pays nearly $3,800 every month. He proudly says he's paying himself instead of a landlord. But when you look at where that money actually goes, the picture changes fast. Most of it disappears into interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and mortgage insurance. Only a tiny portion builds ownership. In reality, Scott walked away from a $2,000 rental and replaced it with thousands of dollars of unrecoverable housing costs every month. And somehow, he feels wealthier doing it. Aaron thought he was making a smart financial move. Scott thought he was escaping a trap. Both were wrong, just in different ways. And the reason they're wrong is the same reason millions of people buy homes without ever understanding the true cost of ownership. Before most people buy a house, they've already accepted 4 beliefs as facts. You've probably heard all of them, and maybe you've believed them too. The first is that renting is throwing money away. The second is that a home forces you to save money. The third is that real estate always goes up. And the fourth is that buying a house is the primary way ordinary people become wealthy. The problem is that each of these beliefs contains just enough truth to sound convincing, but none of them tell the full story. And that missing part is where enormous amounts of money quietly disappear. Let's start with the biggest myth of all. Renting is throwing money away. It sounds reasonable. After all, when you rent, you don't own anything at the end of the month. But here's the question nobody asks. How much of a mortgage payment do you actually keep? Let's look at Aaron's first mortgage payment. His loan balance is $320,000. His interest rate is around 5%, and his monthly mortgage payment is roughly $2,000. Sounds great, right? Not exactly. On that very first payment, around $1,700 goes straight to interest. Only a few $100s reduce the loan balance. That means most of the payment disappears forever, exactly like rent. The bank keeps it, and you never see it again. And that's before we add property taxes, homeowner's insurance, repairs, maintenance, the new water heater, the roof replacement, or the vac system that dies at the worst possible moment. All of those expenses are real. None of them build equity. They simply keep the house functioning. The uncomfortable reality is that homeowners also spend large amounts of money every month that they'll never recover. The only difference is that those costs are hidden behind the word ownership. Now let's talk about the second myth. A house is forced savings. This one is partially true. Yes, every mortgage payment includes some principal, and yes, over time that builds ownership. But what most buyers don't realize is how little ownership they gain during the early years. Mortgage amortization is heavily front-loaded. The bank gets paid first. You get paid later. During the first several years of a typical mortgage, the majority of every payment goes toward interest. In Aaron's case, after 5 years of payments, he would have paid well over $100,000 in interest, while building only a fraction of that amount in additional equity. The bank becomes wealthy immediately. You wait. And while you're waiting, another cost quietly works against you. Opportunity cost. This is the cost nobody sees because it never appears on a statement. Aaron's $80,000 down payment feels productive because it's attached to a house. But what if that same money had been invested elsewhere? Historically, Broad stock market index funds have generated roughly 7% annual returns above inflation over long periods. At that rate, $80,000 grows substantially within 5 years. Meanwhile, residential real estate appreciation has historically exceeded inflation by only about 1 to 2% annually. That's a massive difference. The money trapped inside the house may grow, but often far slower than people imagine. And because nobody receives a bill labeled lost opportunity, most homeowners never notice the trade-off. The largest cost in the entire transaction becomes invisible. Now let's make things more interesting. Enter Scott. Unlike Aaron, Scott didn't buy conservatively. The bank approved him for more, so he borrowed more. He purchased a larger home, put less money down, and because his down payment was under 20%, he triggered private mortgage insurance, an extra expense designed to protect the lender, not him. Every month, Scott pays hundreds of dollars for insurance that benefits someone else, yet he considers it part of investing. His housing costs balloon, his interest costs explode. And despite paying thousands each month, very little actually increases his ownership stake. The irony is almost painful. Scott hated renting because he thought it was wasteful. Yet his new housing expenses exceed his old rent by a wide margin. The amount of money disappearing every month is actually larger than before. The label changed. The math did. So why do so many people end up buying more house than they need? Because the entire system quietly nudges them in that direction. Think about the mortgage pre-approval process. A lender tells you the maximum amount they'll lend. Most buyers hear that number and assume it's a recommendation. It isn't. It's a ceiling, the absolute limit. And lenders earn more when loans are large. Then there are real estate agents. Most are honest professionals, but their compensation usually rises as the purchase price rises. Spending more generally benefits everyone involved in the transaction except the buyer, and hovering over all of it is one of the most powerful financial fears in existence. Buy now, or you'll be priced out forever. That fear pushes people to rush, to stretch, to compromise, and to ignore the numbers. Yet housing markets aren't one-way escalators. They never have been. Over long periods, home values rise, but not always quickly, not always consistently, and certainly not guaranteed in every market or every decade. Now let's compare 3 people. Aaron buys responsibly. Scott buys aggressive, and a third person chooses to rent. But she does something almost no renter does. She invests the difference. Instead of using her savings for a larger lifestyle, she treats those savings like a mortgage payment. The down payment she never made gets invested. The monthly savings from renting get invested. Year after year. Month after month. Compounding quietly in the background. 5 years later, the results surprise almost everyone. Scott, despite making the largest payments, ends up with the weakest outcome. Aaron performs better, but after transaction costs, closing fees, interest, and selling expenses, his gains are far smaller than most people expect. The renter may end up with substantially more liquid wealth than either homeowner, not because renting is magically superior, but because investing the difference can be extraordinarily powerful. And this is the most important point in the entire discussion. Renting does not automatically win. Buying does not automatically win. There is no universal answer. The winner depends entirely on the numbers, the home price, the rent, the interest rate, the appreciation rate, the investment return, the length of time you stay. Change those variables and the outcome changes too. Sometimes buying absolutely wins, especially if you're staying for 10 years or longer, if home prices rise strongly, and if you value stability and control over your living situation. But other times, renting is clearly the superior financial decision. The problem is that most people never run the comparison. They assume ownership equals wealth, and assumptions are expensive. So before buying a house, run 4 simple checks. First, calculate the price-to-rent ratio. Take the purchase price and divide it by the annual rent of a comparable property. Lower ratios generally favor buying, while higher ratios often favor renting. Second, estimate the true cost of ownership, not just the mortgage, but everything: interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and opportunity cost. Third, determine your break-even timeline. Buying involves significant transaction costs, and if you're likely to move in a few years, those costs matter a lot. Fourth, if you choose to rent, invest the difference. Not someday, not when it's convenient. Every month. Because the renter only wins when savings become investments. Otherwise, the advantage disappears. And that's the lesson most people never hear. A home can absolutely be a wonderful purchase. It can provide stability, freedom, control, and a place that truly feels like yours. Those benefits are real. They're valuable. And for many families, they're worth paying for. But that's a lifestyle decision, not automatically an investment decision. Aaron measured equity when he should have measured total wealth. Scott measured status when he should have measured mathematics. Neither asked the question that actually mattered: will this house increase my wealth more than my alternatives? Because the real choice was never rent versus buy. It was numbers versus assumptions, math versus stories. And before you sign a mortgage that could shape the next 30 years of your financial life, make sure you're making the decision with the first one, not the second.